Good evening and welcome. I'm Michael Haigh from the Shrewsbury District and North Wales branch of IWA, and it's my pleasure to host this evening's IWA webinar, where we're going to be focusing especially on the waterways in the Northwest. I'm delighted to welcome distinguished panelists who are with me here. We have Canal and River Trust's Chief Executive, Richard Parry, and Northwest Region Director, Daniel Greenhalgh, who will be doing their presentations shortly. I'm also pleased to have enlisted the help of IWA's National Chairman, Paul Rogers, who's agreed to act as our moderator for the Q&A session after Richard and Daniel's presentations.
Thanks, Mike. First of all, very great to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you and the North Wales and Shrewsbury group, and indeed expanded, I know, to the whole Northwest region. And I notice, of course, friends from all over joining as well, which is great. So thank you for the opportunity. Bit of a double act between Daniel and I, and very conscious that these things can be a bit difficult to sit still through. So we're going to try and go at a pace. Speak to you for about 30 minutes together, me first, then Daniel to follow, and hopefully that gives as much time as possible for hearing your questions, so you can ask us the things that are on your mind rather than just the things that we want to talk to you about. So I've got some slides. I'm afraid it's a bit death by PowerPoint, but it's sort of better than looking at me for the next sort of 20 minutes or so. I'm not going to just exclusively talk about the sort of short-term coronavirus response. I will cover that, but I thought it'd be worth giving a bit of sort of context where the trust is, some headlines for our annual report for the year just complete in March, which is about to be released, and take a little bit about looking to the future as well. And then Daniel's going to really bring the regional perspective after me. So just to very quickly sort of make a start, if I can, he said. Why is it not moving? Okay, so very quickly, taking the overview, and I won't sort of give you too much of this because I'll get down to the nitty-gritty, but our vision is very much about how we use these great waterways of ours to have this impact, transforming places and enriching lives. Our strategy is based around the two strands: to care for the waterways and really think about that long-term sustainable future that we all so very much want to see. But in parallel with that, recognise the benefit we can deliver to people, to the nation, through improving their well-being, and the kind of the synergy, the sort of the virtuous circle we can create by using that way of appealing to people, to demonstrate the value and the benefits, to strengthen engagement and build support, and then build that population that will help us care for the waterways, both directly, but also through the voice and maybe the actions that they take, looking to the longer term. So that our strategy is still very much around that, and taking that down a slight level, we've been refining, if you like, kind of what does this mean when you sort of actually sort of chunk it up a little bit. And clearly the three blue boxes on the left are very much about the kind of core heavy lifting, if you like, that is about caring for the waterways and the environment, about delivering that satisfying experience for people using the water, whether on a boat, on the towpath, whatever their kind of interests are, they feel that they've had a worthwhile visit, growing the income that's so vital to enable all of that. And I guess that's really been the kind of core mission going back to prior to the trust and in our creation. The thing we're focusing more of our bandwidth on, our effort, are really the three things on the right. And again, hopefully none of this is brand new to you, but just to sort of reinforce. So about thinking about how we make that impact on individuals and communities to deliver that sort of well-being in the widest sense, both economically, socially and environmentally. To think about how we grow the brand, increase our awareness of us, our supporters, and broaden our influence. So that, again, some of the things that are really important for our future, we can achieve and unlock through building that support. And not least, recognising there's a job of work to be done still to really think about changing how the trust operates, have the capability to do more, to be more productive, and a culture that goes along with that. And then tying that into a series of measures that really enable us to capture and evaluate the progress we're making, and of course programs of work that I'll say a bit more about later to really kind of crystallize the things, the priorities that we need to deliver. So that's kind of where we sort of start at 30,000 feet. Why do we think this is so important? Well, it's because of the geography. So many people on our doorstep. Many of you I know will have seen this sort of slide before, but recognizing the scale of impact we can have in particularly many of the more hard to reach, deprived parts of our urban areas where canals run through, etc. Recognizing the value, of course, of the amazing countryside it connects with as well, particularly, he hastens to add, in sort of North Wales, Cheshire, Lancashire, etc. And it's about then the things on this slide, which again, I won't labour the point, hopefully you've seen some of this before, but recognising that by being free of charge, open to people to come and just get on the towpath, active every day, we can deliver the following things: that natural health service, sustainable routes, close to nature, and delivering beauty so people can really take a pride in their local places. And we really think that all the research tells us, not just our own, increasingly what we hear from others, that this is a really winning formula. It depends on this: growing involvement, being relevant, connecting to people. You know, the growth in volunteers has been great, and that's critical to it. Partnering with other groups, many of them IWA groups, but other local community groups of every variety, and building adoptions and other ways of making sure those connections are really strong, so all those wider benefits can then be realised. Critical to raise awareness and build support. Critical to target sort of a wider audience, a new audience, thinking about the next generation, thinking about digital channels, and having a message relevant to them. And then developing the trust, very much taking us on this journey from the things on the left that are really important, and the infrastructure, the waterways, but recognising we need to have a wider appeal that's about seeing the waterways not just as a heritage infrastructure network, but something that speaks to people today, that is a green-blue network, that is for people, an organisation that is agile and responsive to those needs, and hence people loving the trust as well as the waterways and the things we look after. Quick headlines on 1920. So where do we start from really as this whole sort of pandemic started to overwhelm us? So we had a pretty good year, 1920. The annual report will tell the whole story. Revenue on the left, you can see 216 million, another sort of record year for us as revenue increases. And expenditure, again, the breakdown with all the various different shades, which I won't try and go through, but you'll have a chance to see this when the annual report comes out. A substantial increase actually in our expenditure on charitable activities, in part because of some accounting for Toddbrook Reservoir. Again, we're not going to talk very much about that today, a subject on its own, but we've made a substantial provision, not just for the costs we've incurred, but the future costs associated with Toddbrook, which means that number is substantially higher than in previous years. Taking the provision out and just looking at the trend generally, that sort of shows the trend with income still rising, costs that we can spend on the assets. There's about a 40 million gap because of the cost of generating the income and some of the wider overheads of our pension fund obligations and things of that sort. But in essence, driving the income we earn into the waterways that we all care for. And just demonstrating how that spend has kind of really flipped up, even not allowing the full provision for Toddbrook. You can see the asset spend has increased gradually, with a bit of an increase in the last year, particularly as some of our infrastructure works have expanded. And that would include, for example, our major Fish Pass project funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, he said quickly, on the River Severn. And the message that assets condition continues to improve. It's a very sort of simplistic measure, this, but it's a good measure in terms of the general state of the network. It's a gradual improvement over the last few years as the extra spend we're making hopefully makes some difference. Lots of things that I know before you tell me that we still need to focus on, areas for improvement are rife, but underlying that, the asset condition improves. That's true also for towpath, to some of the investment that we've had from third parties there as well. So very quick preamble, turning now to look at the COVID response. You will be very familiar with some of these headlines, I have no doubt. The lockdown started, of course, in March, closed essentially for 2 months, for essential use only for 2 months. You'll be aware the towpath stayed open, which actually generated quite a lot of communication, but became quite an opportunity for us to connect with new audiences. And then the navigation reopening, really in a series of steps, so that from the 4th of July, when overnight stays became committed, we saw a real surge in use of the waterway. So particularly holiday makers staying in the UK, but I know a lot of leisure boaters able to go out as well. A quick word about the towpath pattern. Very interesting for us in terms of the longer term, how the usage shifted. A lot of use in the sort of inner city areas around sort of some of our towns, our post-industrial areas, some of the places I mentioned there, and a decline in some of the more typically busy areas where people not going to city centres, not going to the high-profile tourist sites to the same extent. So shift in demand and creating an opportunity for a connection with a new audience. Some of the other headlines just to show here. So obviously our museums and attractions open to follow on. We were able to resume some of our activities. Obviously, most of this year's events have been cancelled, as you will all too be keenly aware, I've no doubt. But Let's Fish programs, some of the heritage walks and things were able to resume. We have latterly been able to resume our towpath fundraising in a very carefully managed, controlled way, and really focusing on enhancing our digital offer so that people who can't go and visit the local waterways, can't go out boating, have been able to at least have some opportunity to reconnect with memories of days gone by. Asset works were suspended for some of this period, although we managed to maintain the work at the very big sites, generally quite remote, generally able to apply social distancing, you know, very easily. And we were able to sort of then pick things back up at the end of June to continue with a quickly replanned work program, and just some examples of some of the work we've been doing illustrated there. I said I wouldn't make Toddbrook, but particularly at Toddbrook, where we've moved through a pace to do the temporary works and are now on to the next stage of the project there. Some of the internal things that matter, again, just to try and flesh this out a bit, I'm sorry that I'm going through this quickly. Obviously, we took advantage of the government's furlough, job retention scheme, only for a short while, really, because obviously the network stayed open. We kept a lot of people out working. And as we were able to sort of restart many of our activities, we brought people back. So that really by the end of July, only a very small handful of people were still on furlough leave where their specific role wasn't needed. Volunteering, which of course had been suspended, then ramped up pretty quickly from the beginning of July. You know, over 1,000 volunteers now back doing their sort of regular duties is probably the wrong word, but you know, volunteer lock keepers or some of the regular cleanup groups, etc. And a very popular seminar program I dare say some of you have participated in, with a whole range of speakers to keep people connected and to use the opportunity really to share some more of the work that we do for people who perhaps wouldn't otherwise have had the chance to hear about it. Real focus on engagement through this, so lots of sort of ongoing use of things like Zoom and Teams, and general big effort on making sure people stayed connected, thinking about their individual well-being, and some very good feedback for us in the surveys that we've run that actually have increased above where we were at the start of the pandemic. So that's been, again, a small silver lining for us, in that we have something in terms of the way that colleagues have turned towards the organisation almost and felt more positive towards it because of maybe some of the way we've handled the experience. We've had limited office reopening. We've kind of backtracked on that. What limited office reopening we've reversed from. So really we're back to essential use only, really putting the effort into supporting those out on the navigations, keeping the yards open, keeping the various key areas for our operational colleagues. And one of the strands that really will pick up, not a subject for today, we've really been challenging ourselves to learn as much as we can from this whole experience. How can we reimagine the future? You'll have heard lots of organisations undertaking something similar, I dare say, but thinking about, if we have been able to work from home largely successfully for the most part, for those more office-based professional roles, well, what would that look like if we try and extend that into the future? How could we change our office portfolio, save some money, but also create better collaboration space, repurpose how we use the estate that we've got, and extending that into many other areas of our work as well. Quick word about finances. We have been impacted much less, I dare say, than many other organisations, particularly many charities. Even organisations, of course, you will know, like the National Trust, taking quite a big hit. Well, because I guess the diversification of our income, the importance of that core grant, but also really the strength of our investments and our wider commercial income, which has proved very resilient to the impact of the pandemic. We have, of course, supported customers. We extended licence fees for a month. We supported some of the hire boat companies and other tenants in sort of critically affected activities, so that we've tried to make sure that we've shared the pain, at least help people to get through the leaner period. We have, of course, also making sure that we keep a very close eye on expenses so that the net position hasn't been so bad. In the short term, the cash position, that means that we're going to get through this year into next year without having any real pain in terms of our cash flow. But really the challenge for us is what this is doing about our longer term position. Clearly we're all concerned about the economic recovery, what will happen to investment returns, very important for us. Some of our other progress has stalled somewhat. We've seen our friends' numbers decline. Some of the other potential funding opportunities close down a little bit. And of course, we've got our grant review and thinking about where we will be in 5 or 6 years' time. and that's clearly going to be affected at a bigger political level by the scale of the money that has been thrown at the current problems. So our challenge is really, with cost pressures rising as well, the focus very much on how we need to upscale and really step up our infrastructure resilient works with thinking about climate change and the impact, as well as some of the lessons from Toddbrook. Means the lesson for us is thinking about 2, 3, 5 years out, how we're really going to have to evolve things at the trust, manage our resources very carefully to be able to think about that long-term sustainable future. I mentioned projects carrying on, just a couple of highlights to give some good news. So great to see the Grantham Canal restoration really getting on with the next lock and the gates being fitted as we came out of the lockdown. Restoration conference, quick plug on Saturday, of course, where some of these things will be celebrated, no doubt. And Unlocking the Severn, our very big lottery-funded programme to help a rather lame little fish to get up the River Severn again. The fish passes are amazing to see. The one in the top right has just opened actually at Beverley, and the others are moving on. So been a very big chunk of work for us to deliver that, and great to see that delivering on its commitments. Just a very quick word on this, because it wasn't all about the pandemic in the last 6 months. Of course, we did live through the Black Lives Matter campaigns and activities and events. And of course, we were caught up in that with the removal of the Robert Milligan statue that actually turned out to be on a piece of land at the London Docklands that was in our ownership. So it caused us to have to step forward to address what we felt was the right actions there, working with the local community. And I guess that's triggered a sort of further reflection on the relationship of this long history of our inland waterways with transatlantic slavery. We've published work on our website, and we're very much focused thinking now about the today challenges for us around diversity inclusion with a fresh eye, and some encouraging things happening around opportunities with young people, Supporting England Inequality Fund that I think Daniel may speak about later. So some things that have arisen from this that we're very much responding to as well. Daniel will talk more about some of these things, but just to say, I haven't forgotten that as the navigation's reopened, we have had some challenges. Of course, we had the floods at the back end of the winter that caused a lot of devastation in large parts, particularly of the north. And then, of course, a tremendously dry spring period. So the real swing of the climate causing shortages, which fortunately we had enough rainfall at the sort of midpoint of the summer to enable us to keep going through until now. We have had more asset failures. Again, it's a subject all of its own, but just to acknowledge that, particularly thinking about the way that some of our lockgate heels have failed during this period, whether that's a weather effect, whether it's a period of non-use, more for us to study, but important that we do. Challenges around antisocial behaviour, Daniel may say more about those, and obviously opportunities. So thinking about how we take the plastics challenge, tap into this environmental growing mood that we've seen through the lockdown, importance of nature, importance of the outdoors, and encouraging people to step up to get involved in that. And we're going to have another push on that in the next few weeks. Other initiatives, Daniel will probably touch on Greenhalgh, because we're just at the point where all the various submissions we made are yielding the results. And it's been great that we've been able to put some of the much more challenging locations into this process. And that's obviously important that we demonstrate that the places that people might be more wary about, we can show that we have got something very worthwhile and attractive and pleasant and well managed. Towpath schemes, talked a bit earlier about that investment. That's continued very strongly through this period, notwithstanding some of the disruption. And of course, with all the messages around sustainable active travel, walking, cycling, much more opportunity for us, hopefully, to capitalise on. And linked to that, of course, vital that we tackle the issue about how the space needs to be shared. Pedestrians having priority, really targeting those cyclists who go too fast. Our research is telling us it's actually only a relatively small proportion that really do go beyond what is acceptable, but still the impact that can have is pretty significant, we know. So just trying to make sure that we address that. And our current campaign actually has been picked up a lot of very positive traction. Quick word about funding. We've had some success with Historic England just giving us fairly recently some funding for some of our heritage work planned for this winter. That's really been helpful in relieving some of those financial pressures. And looking ahead into 2021, we've secured some extra funding from the People's Postcode Lottery to really recharge and really sort of get up and running with our climate action programme, which is a really big opportunity for us, given how important some of this work will be, both for our own infrastructure, but clearly for all those communities that we want to work with as well. Other opportunities for funding, Green Jobs Challenge. We've made a submission through that. The Green Recovery funding. We've got walking, as I say, a package of walking and cycling proposals with DFT. Proposals around the Kickstart Job Scheme that we know we can play a role in some of the areas more impacted by some of the economic impacts of the pandemic to help young people get back working, etc. So hopefully we'll submit that and get some positive response. And other opportunities around green prescribing, opportunities around Wales, recognising that there's a different funding model there, etc. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of the schemes. We'll make these slides available. So quick word then about looking ahead. So lots of stuff to get through this year. The plan more or less out the window, but what are we going to do in 2021? Come back to the sort of a version of what I showed you at the start and how important it is that those things in that blue box at the bottom, the strategic programs, really have the proper scoping, proper focus, so we can use as we move through, hopefully being optimistic at the back end of the pandemic, we can get back on the core programs of work to deliver that improvement to the waterways. We can focus on our work around regional community wellbeing. We can start to really build that sustainability and climate action program that the PPL funding and hopefully some of the DEFRA Green Recovery funding can support. And this learning the lessons, reimagining the trust will be a strand of work for us into the next year as well. So lots of ambition still. We've had a year this year, of course, when we've been taken off in a different direction. We're back to focus on those important long-term goals very soon. This is very much the model for the future, how we become a partner of choice, working with local communities, being inclusive about the ways that we do things. And then thinking about a big challenge for us coming up linked to all of that is, of course, where we go with grants. And our review with government really starts to wind up now. We have a 2021-22 date in our contract with government, but realistically to have the kind of the work program up and running to deliver the kind of depth of evaluation, research, analysis that will require, the work will start in earnest immediately, really, now that we've a little bit more capacity, and very much focusing on how important this will be really for all of us in getting the right outcome from that work, so that by July 22, when government is required under the contract to give us an indication of future funding, we're able to make the strongest argument that we can, linked to both our performance to date, the wider impact and outcomes, but also assessment of these rising future pressures and needs that the organisation will undoubtedly have as we contemplate the impact of climate change. We think we're going to need to spend tens of millions of pounds more on some of our high-risk assets. How we fund that is going to be a very big challenge, and we have to get that message across into the grant review so that can be factored into long-term thinking. And a final slide from me before I hand to Daniel. You may have questions about this, but just to give you a heads up, Michael thought it'd be useful. We started, as you know, about 10 days ago, a boat license terms and conditions consultation. I wasn't sure quite how much interest there would be, and we were sort of overwhelmed with responses in the first week or so. First 8 days, over 2,500 responses. Not to influence the consultation because it's run for many more weeks, but it looks like the proposals are receiving very much on average. Obviously, there's views at both ends of it, but largely positive on average. The most contentious proposal, which I think will probably need further clarity, is the cruising away from the home mooring changes and our intent around that, very much to limit people sort of getting a mooring in one remote part of the country and then spending all their time somewhere else, and making sure that there isn't the opportunity for people to take advantage of that in a way that wouldn't help us manage the waterways. The Historic Narrowboat Club are going to help us do a bit more work to refine the boat dimensions proposal in the package as well. And we're very keen to have these engagement with boating organisations and waterway organisations. We've done two. We've met the IWA team and very much encourage people to respond to that. So I will try and pause for breath there. I will stop sharing and hand straight to Daniel so we get through all this, and hopefully you then have some time for questions. I went longer than I should have done, Daniel. I'm sorry. So I've left you about 10 minutes.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Richard. And thanks to everyone. Delighted to be here tonight. And I'll just get my slideshow up. I've often found myself saying over the last few weeks, where has the year gone? And I suppose when you see it all panned out from the trust at a national level, there's just been so much work going on. It's no wonder time has flown by. So, in terms of the Northwest specific update, so our initial response to the COVID pandemic was, it's sort of the same as the nations. We
the news came on us quite fast, and we were agile and we adapted really quickly, and we put a real focus on just delivering the essential and safety critical works, tasks like water control, inspecting our reservoirs and things like that. We had to totally rewrite our rotas for our operational colleagues to ensure that we could provide a 7-day coverage with the minimum colleagues needed. We did have quite a few colleagues on furlough, but we combined teams and we mixed and matched colleagues, and we worked really well throughout the trust. As Richard said, our towpaths remained open, and you know, this was absolutely the right thing to do. You know, I did some media stuff trying to give some softer messages around share the space and people be considerate to voters, and I did that on the Northwest News, and it was up at Barrowford, and the amount of people that were up there taking their daily walk and getting some exercise, and these were people from the towns around Barrowford, such as Nelson, and you know, they were saying they were coming there because it was green space, they didn't have a back garden, and actually they felt that they needed the canal and access to the towpath during the lockdown in particular. You know, we basically pressed the pause button on a lot of the activities that we were doing. You know, some of the construction works, volunteer opportunities, the museum and Anderton boat lift were closed. But we sort of pressed the start button on doing a lot of things differently, you know, communicating differently and working differently. And so some of the challenges we experienced during lockdown, we just saw a huge increase in fly tipping. Now, whether this was related to the local authority recycling centres being closed, or you know, the increased use of the towpath, we're not too sure. But it was an enormous task for a depleted team. We also had a number of significant pollution incidents in our region, some major fish kills, and you know, we think people were taking the opportunity to do things they shouldn't do. While perhaps there weren't as many eyes and ears on the ground, and we've actually worked quite well with the Environment Agency, and we're recovering our costs on a couple of those pollution incidents. Magnet fishing seemed to grow exponentially, and obviously all the, you know, the rubbish that's left behind. We had loads of unauthorised swimming. And one of the real challenges was some of our projects had to continue on site, so we couldn't stop them. So the picture in the top there is of the Loom Embankment Repair project. So the challenges after lockdown is it was much harder starting stuff and restarting programs and activity, because we now had guidelines from the government. So we had to undertake huge amounts of risk assessments and reassess tasks. We had to fit that within some protocols that we designed. We had to ensure that offices and buildings, services were COVID secure. They had certain cleaning regimes, inspection regimes in place. At the same time, we were having extraordinary water resource challenges in the region. We'd come out of a pretty wet January to March in the northwest to, you know, what was a, you know, really dry and warm spring, and the Leeds and Liverpool in particular, and the Peak Forest and the Macclesfield Canal, in part due to the lack of water from Togbrook, really suffered, and we had to close them. But we found that, you know, we really engaged with various stakeholders about these closures. We introduced some movement windows to allow boaters to move once navigation had resumed, and we took a slightly different approach of leaving, particularly Leeds and Liverpool. We left it closed a slight bit longer after the lockdown to allow for the maximum guaranteed usage during the summer holidays. So then we had to pick up the leak repair programme, our bridge repair programme. We had to replace all our limit the use signs with enjoy your local canal signs. Vegetation management proved to be a huge challenge. We'd stopped cutting the grass. We'd had the perfect conditions, as I'd said, it being such nice growing weather, and in particular aquatic weed. We think obviously aided by the lack of movement of boats. It's just been such a struggle for us to get on top of. We made quite decent plans of tackling lots of paddle and sill repairs, and we've had to get them back instigated, and we've had a backlog of over 700 planned preventative maintenance visits that we're trying to catch up. And that's been the theme and the big challenge, is trying to catch up on everything that we didn't do during the lockdown. But it does feel like we are getting back to normal, and it's not all about the operations that happens in the waterway. And you know, our rangers and licensed support officers are starting the boat checks again and picking up their caseloads. Volunteers have started to return to some tasks. Granted, we've not got every single, it's not like it was before, and we are still working hard at opening up those opportunities. But we've been doing things like we plan to replace a lot of our signage, and this is us getting behind on a task in the programme that we found that some volunteers have been brilliant at coming in and helping us catch up with. So we're really grateful for that. Our enterprise and strategic programmes are now all back on site and all back up and running. So it's Stainton Aqueduct, Super Slowway. Our Active Waterways programme, which is a programme in Cheshire for over 55s to try and get them more active by using the waterways. We've actually found that we've now more people subscribed to the programme post-pandemic and lockdown than there was before. And we've actually got to the stage where we're full, we're totally full. So if anyone would like to volunteer to be a guided walk leader on our Active Waterways programme, there is many people that would really be grateful for that. So please get in touch. Our Finsley Gate Regeneration project there, which is a project that's been years in the planning, and it's great to see that back on site. And our towpath restoration schemes have restarted at Aldlam and Disley. They're now finished, and our Chester Telsmere Port towpath is just starting on site. A huge challenge was to reopen Anderton Boatlift and the National Waterways Museum at Ellesmere Port to the public. We had to get our Visit England We're Good to Go standard, and that, you know, there was 19 individual tasks for us to complete before we could get that We're Good to Go mark, and that was a huge amount of effort from the team to do that. We have had volunteers on a phased return at the museum and at Anderton, and actually helping out in different roles and supporting us in different ways than we've had previously. We had a visit from Nigel Huddleston, the MP, who's the Minister for Sport, Heritage and Tourism. He visited a site visit that Richard hosted at Anderton Boatlift, and Esther McVeigh, who's the local MP, she came along as well. So it's great to see support, the support there from the government. Visitor numbers have been a little bit disappointing. Initially, they started at about 50% of last year's numbers, which was actually better than expected, but that's started to tail off now. But the feedback about the experience from visitors has been positive. They do feel safe when they come to both Anderton and the museum, and they see that we've taken our responsibilities seriously and made it a safe and enjoyable environment. Our green flag aspirations in the Northwest, we've got an ambitious target. We want half of our canals and waterways to be green flag accredited by the end of its 2022. So our 3-year business plan that we're in the first year of now. So for this year, all our new submissions have been judged, except the Weaver navigation. That's actually happening this week. That got delayed slightly. We are starting to hear some feedback of whether we've won this, but the official announcement isn't made until next week. But for example, we've had a green flag delivered by Royal Mail to the Burnley office, so I think it's safe to assume we've got the Greenberfield to Barrowford section. And Green Flag, for their own promotional video, started filming on Stanley Lock Flight this week, so I think it's safe to say that we've got that one as well. But that is hugely important for not only for the Trust, but for the region too. In terms of normal, all throughout this, rumbling along has been our works at Toddbrook, and that's been a huge piece of work within the region since August 2019. And it was great to see that the temporary works were completed in September. We appointed Arab, a specialist consultant and design consultant, in June. They've been appointed to do the full design of the full repair scheme. They've gone through a long list of 13 options. They've managed to reduce that down to 2 in August. And we've gone to public consultation.
Yeah, apologies. I wasn't sure whether it was just me, but
It's one of those.
Here to have lost Daniel. Richard, can I ask you to come onto camera at this point? And I know it's not ideal. Hopefully we'll get Daniel back. But we've had so many questions come in. I'm sure for your sake, you hope Daniel comes back, because otherwise you'll be answering all these questions. Let's get to some of these. I'm not going to take them in the order they come in. I'm just going to try and bring them together. And one of the things, Richard, both you and Daniel have said is that stakeholder engagement is obviously very important. How have you seen that that's changed over these last 8 months? How have you managed to maintain the sort of level of engagement that I know you really want to achieve?
Yeah, we've had to adapt is the first thing, Paul, of course, and stakeholders don't all come in the same shape and size, do they? So it's been a question of adapting in different ways to different stakeholders. I think, like anything, there have been opportunities, haven't there? So actually, there's some stakeholders who we've probably been able to get closer to, partly because the realization about how important the role the waterways play has struck home for some people. Partly because actually, as we've all learned, you can jump onto a Zoom call and have half an hour with someone, far more easily than trying to sort of wrestle them to ground in Portcullis House for an MP or track someone to their constituency or something. So actually, in some respects, we've had a chance to have more of a conversation with some people. It would be great to have Daniel comment about things in the Northwest, because really one of the key roles of the regional directors is to get as close as they can to those key stakeholders, really where it matters, on the ground in each of the regions where we need to make our work have the highest impact that we can. So I think we've adapted, we've got through it as best we can. I think one of our key challenges, if I'm honest, Paul, just to sort of, without saying too much more, is DEFRA's bandwidth has really narrowed down, and that's obviously been a challenge. And when you're trying to have a conversation with government, we shared some conversations, didn't we, about support for waterway businesses, and that proved difficult at the time. And I think that's been our greatest problem, really, is voices in government that have just really kind of locked into the pandemic, understandably, and the time they have for anything else being very difficult, even in unexpected places, because people have been, they've been seconded across, so teams have had fewer people, or even if you're in a part of DEFRA that wouldn't naturally perhaps have a role in the pandemic, suddenly you're dealing with, where are we with foods and farming, and some of the things that DEFRA has to concern about, even if the waterways team wouldn't naturally, just the attention of the senior people drifting into the more understandably urgent, immediate issues. So yes, we've tried to keep things going, and I'm hopeful that, again, if we can anticipate where we might be in 6-9 months' time, we're well set to continue, hopefully, some very positive relationships.
Yeah, one of the specific questions that we had coming in was that the Canal and River Trust used to hold regular meetings for boaters and other stakeholders. And the question was saying, not aware of any of those happening. Actually, I've heard recently that Canal and River Trust West Midlands ran their autumn user forum on Zoom just Tuesday this week. And certainly what I've heard was that went down really well. So do you know of more plans for that type of thing?
Well, again, I'll let Daniel comment about his plans for the Northwest, and I genuinely actually don't know what he's done. I think it's a really fair point. I think Roger, who raised it, has raised that with me previously about the London and the South East. So I'm sorry, Roger, if things haven't moved on there yet, because they are something we should be looking at. I am very sympathetic to the regional teams. They've been coping with an awful lot. We've been doing just to keep the sort of the day job. Even the number of inquiries around some of the things have been exceptional, because of course it hasn't just been the coronavirus, it's been suddenly people are busy using the waterways all at once. And so we've actually had a sort of bit of a double whammy in terms of the demands that some of our regional teams have been coping with, and we've had understandably other priorities, but I completely acknowledge that dialogue is really important. And as we're finding tonight, it's not so hard to get on a Zoom call and talk to people. So I hope Daniel has heard some of this. He's back now, and we'll make sure that certainly in the Northwest, but hopefully across the country, we can galvanise and really up the ante on some of those conversations with users. I very much take the point.
Daniel, just on that, are there any specific plans to engage with local boaters, local stakeholders in the Northwest via Zoom and during this period? Sorry, Paul,
I got kicked out. I've literally just joined back in, but in terms of that, so from a personal level, I joined Mike, Wendy, and the other regional chairs with Sir Robert on their regional Zoom call, and so I have an active dialogue. I think with the chairs, I speak separately with them. I know my boating and customer service manager Liam has done something similar, and in terms of we had some feedback at our autumn user forums last year that users would prefer a more area-based one. So the Lancaster Canal would prefer to have their session with Angie. So if people just hang on for us, we're about to sort of propose how we're going to start them properly in the spring, but we are going to continue some kind of user forum going into the autumn, but we're going to try and get those area-based ones up and running in the spring.
Excellent. Well, keep us posted on that, because we'll definitely be very happy to promote and support any of those activities and make sure that it's well circulated, not just within the IWA world, but beyond that as well. Well, that's great. Now, I'm going to focus in on some other specific questions that have come up. You both talked about the whole diversity of users on the waterways and how we try and make sure that beyond boating on towpaths and all of the variety of users, clearly COVID has brought some pressure on that. And we've had questions about speeding cyclists and others. What do you see as the kind of long-term future for that in terms of being able to make sure the waterways really are there for all?
Well, I think it's a key challenge, Paul, and one we've talked about, and some of you may have seen. There was a big article in Waterways World I contributed to a few months ago, and I think, you know, because we're on the doorstep for so many millions of people, and it's a very, very mixed, you know, audience. You know, the population of people with close access to a waterway could, in a way, not be more diverse. You know, it is more diverse than the average UK population. You know, it's an audience that very often doesn't have very much more green space, so there's a natural opportunity for us. And actually, I do think we are seeing in small steps, but I think, you know, clear steps, that we are seeing that greater engagement starting to make some things happen. You know, we've done Daniel was just talking, I think, almost as he got cut off, about his Community Roots program. Yeah, that's something we put a lot of resource and focus into to, you know, really build some of those relationships in communities where traditionally we haven't really had an appreciation of the benefit of having a local waterway on the doorstep. We've got to make it relevant to people, so they've got to see that it's something that they can enjoy on their own terms, rather than maybe what's been important to those of us been involved for longer. We have got to make it a safe place. I take the point about speeding cyclists. You know, it's almost like I can have one wish, you know, in life. It would be to sort of slow every cyclist down. I don't want to lose the cyclists. It's a great place for people who are learning. You know, it's traffic free. So, you know, people who respect it, as I genuinely think, you know, 2/3, 3/4 do. But we've just got to keep on and on and on to tackle the speeding cyclists. And I know there's no panacea, but it's got to be education, behaviour. As I say, our current campaign does seem to be striking home. So hopefully, you know, there's some things that will make it a place that everyone wants to come. And Daniel, over to you to add anything that you're doing locally.
Yeah, I think definitely during the lockdown, when I did get out, you were seeing the feedback from people that they were discovering the canal on their doorstep for the first time. And I think that is a really positive thing, that more people come, more people use it. They then tell others to come and get engaged in turn, because they're the advocates of why they're coming there and the benefits that they're getting from it. It's, you know, there's no single homogenous group of boaters, fishermen, cyclists, walkers, dog walkers, whatever. You know, you get people that are you know, considerate and respectful and will share nicely. You know, I've got 2 6-year-old twins, and I know they have times when they do and they don't do that, but you have other people that don't. I think we just need to be tenacious with our, you know, exacting standards on behaviours and just not accept it. So I think that's my stance on it, that, you know, everyone's welcome, and we just need to keep absolutely being tenacious with those messages.
Perennial problem, and I'm sure it's not going to go away quickly. It's all about respect and trust and making sure that we're all making waterways pleasant for other users. And we're going to try and deal with a couple of questions at once here. There's talk about planned winter work. Richard, you referred to work on the lock gate failures and so on. What's the general position in terms of the ability to do proactive maintenance, trying to allay this constant sort of comment from the sidelines that it doesn't get dealt with until it's broken? I'm sure that's not true, but how do you balance that in terms of limited funds, limited resources, and yet the need to be proactive?
Yeah, Paul, I saw Nick's question. I think it's an absolutely fair challenge for anyone using the waterways. We don't just wait for it to fail. We do have actually a pretty sophisticated long-term asset management program that really is trying to assess condition, regular inspections, building our intelligence, timing our interventions. Clearly, we've got to make the money go as far as it can. We've got to deal with the high-risk structures as the priority. So there's an awful lot of work that goes into just shaping and finalising the program. And it's so frustrating when something fails that we actually didn't see coming because something, you know, just wasn't seen or wasn't prioritised. So all I can say is we try and do our best. This year has been a particularly challenging year because of all the interruptions we've had. You know, the fact we didn't have our kind of first quarter of maintenance work, you know, we would have had our direct service teams doing things in the first quarter. We would have had more planned preventative maintenance, which we do, not perfectly, but we have a program of that. That was more or less cancelled for the first quarter as well. And I think the conditions that we experienced, you know, very hot, dry, following the very wet, very little use of locks, which meant that things like paddle gear weren't getting the sort of regular usage that just kind of keeps them in service. So I think a combination of things have made this year particularly difficult. But I absolutely accept the challenge that if we're to demonstrate the value of what we do around our asset management, you've got to see a steady improvement. You know, you've got to expect that things will gradually be improving as a user. And that's the ultimate test for us. And, you know, everything that doesn't go to plan, we have to learn from to make the plan for next year better than it's been for this year.
And Daniel, anything locally from your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think those members who travel in the northwest will recognise we've had our fair share of you know, problem assets and asset failures in the northwest, and I think what we are I'm sort of disappointed about this year is we've got a reactive maintenance team that we've established, and we had really good, robust plans to get on top of lots of the things that we've had fed back to us by IWA members at places like the user forums. Things like a paddle's broke on a lock, and we leave it. We know it's broke because there's another paddle to use, and then the other paddle breaks, and then the lock's out of action completely. And that is as infuriating for me as it is, you know, for everybody who feeds that back. So we've got a reactive maintenance team in place. I'm hoping that people will start to see on the ground some of the work that is now being picked up. We are playing catch up, but you know, Paul, if I could share with you my sort of bi-monthly report, the amount of works that the teams are picking up, trying to get on top of this maintenance, fixing paddles, sill liners, you know, there is so much work that are going on right now, fixing leaks, etc.
And Paul, just very quickly, because I should have said, it is about money though. I mean, there is a key point. We're going to spend so much more money on our reservoirs, on our other high-risk assets, and that is going to mean that our ability to do some of the basic work on locks, on some of the things that matter to boaters, but frankly are lower risk in terms of our wider public safety obligations, it's going to be a challenge for us unless we can secure funding for that that bigger program that I think, you know, is going to need to be, you know, stretching way beyond the sort of money that we've been funding for the last few years. And that's just worth putting it in context. When things go wrong at a small level, it's often because we're having to tackle some of the perhaps bigger challenges that are about the long-term future for these waterways.
And I want to come back to that. I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes left, and just on the specific topic of maintenance and so on, very, very quick answers if you can. And there's a question here again from Nick around the Anderson lift. Again, don't want a particularly full answer at this stage because we can come back with more detail later. There's speculation that there may be major works needed that might necessitate closure of the lift for a year. Yes or no? Need to get back to us on a floor answer on that one.
Do you want me to take this?
Yes, go.
Yep. So no, he's right. We've got some major repair works to do at the Anderton boat lift. It's going to be a significant investment, and the lift will need to close. We're currently working hard to get that into the programme. It's probably going to be in next year's business plan, so sort of spring 22 is probably when it will close, and it'll probably close for best part of a year, if not longer.
Great. Well, thank you for being so direct.
Paul, just very quickly, it's going to be really costly. It's one of these things, it's a big spend. We really could do with a campaign to raise some money. Obviously, it was funded by, you know, lots of people, lottery funding to restore it. And as Daniel says, it's all got to the stage where it's life expired, and we're going to have to do a major overhaul on the whole thing. We haven't quite got the plan for when and how and exactly what the closure pattern will be, but it'll be onerous. But we need to generate some funding to really make sure that it doesn't hurt us elsewhere if we have to try and fund this.
Well, it's just in the remaining minutes that we've got. We've literally got 2-3 minutes left. I'm really keen to look at that funding because clearly it is a real strain. You mentioned things like the core grant, the fact that investment funding has been reasonably well maintained despite the crazy market. You're entering into this period to look at the core grant. It's going to be a period where you can make submissions, but the waterways world in the whole ecosystem, frankly, really could and should be coming behind you on that. What sort of support do you think you're going to need through this next year, 5 years, as that core grant is renegotiated?
Yeah, I think it's a really important strand to the work, Paul, isn't it? I mean, we've got to do lots of really kind of, you know, desk-based sort of research, digging out all kinds of sort of, you know, complex valuation, etc. But we really need voice. It's going to really ramp up towards the spring of 22, I think. So anything that, you know, IWA can do, that individual members can do, you know, particularly targeting, of course, you know, politicians, targeting people who will be able to influence DEFRA in terms of making their judgments, because ultimately, whatever the evaluation says, it's going to be judgment. How much people care about waterways and care about their long-term future is going to be the key question. So some sort of engagement campaign will be vital as part of that effort, really peaking, as I say, in about 18 months' time.
Thank you. And I think I would like to echo that in terms of this, given the COVID backdrop and the economic backdrop to the country, it's not a very conducive environment for you to be going in and asking for greater funding from government. And so I would lay the challenge out to everyone here is this is as critical as some of the decisions we were faced with in the late 40s and early 50s, just given the sheer crisis economically that we're in and the impact that that could have on what is the most important and certainly the most significant mileage-wise of the waterways navigation authorities. So certainly got my support on that. Now we've got a minute left, and I'm conscious, Daniel, we didn't cover the final few slides. I think we will share those in the follow-up to this, but going back to it now is probably going to be a little difficult. We've got loads more questions. One last one. Clearly, Richard, you're sitting at the head of a really diverse organization. Daniel, even within the area, you're seeing such diversity and so on going on. What sort of advice, what do you see in terms of bringing that diverse organisation together? How do you make it work effectively, efficiently, given your charitable status and given the other responsibilities you have with such a wide degree of stakeholders? How can you be just as tight as you possibly can be?
Well, it's a very possible question to answer in a minute, Paul. I mean, I think clearly I'm very charged with the scale of our responsibility, both for the breadth of what we do and the impact it can have, and that long-term sustainable future that we've got to deliver through this phase of the trust. This 15-year grant agreement that we've had, making sure that we do whatever we can to set a path to the future, so that we go into that grant review from a position of strength, with clear priorities, clear plans, etc. And we've got to really be responsive. And I know how hard Daniel works to try and achieve that locally. It's always going to be a struggle with the resources that we've got. It's amazing how much work volunteers and others in the community are doing to help us make some of those impacts, to extend our reach, make us closer to things on the ground. And I think we've just got to keep trying to do more and more of that, recognizing that the organisation isn't about me, it isn't even about Daniel, it's about the people on the ground, our volunteers, our operatives, those who actually are able to make a difference every day. And hopefully we can unlock the funding, unlock the support, make the right decisions to support them in doing that.
And Daniel, final words to you. How does it feel to be within this great ecosystem that is Canal and River Trust?
It's fantastic. I'm born and bred in the northwest. My first house backed onto the Manchester, Bolton and Bury Canal. So my auntie Mavis still lives in Preston near the Manchester, Bolton and Bury Canal. So she was delighted when we got the towpath improved through there. But yeah, it's personal to me, Paul. I'm super proud to lead this region. I think we've got huge diverse region in terms of what the offer is, and I think sort of covering that point of how do we do it, how do we make it work, is we can't do it alone. And actually I think that's one of the biggest transitions I've seen from British Waterways to the Trust is this. We need to build these relationships and partnerships with communities, with stakeholders, with people with mutual aims and objectives, and that is the way that we will make this much better and deliver everything we want for the communities essentially that we're here to serve.
Great. Well, look, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Richard. I'm conscious that we're over time, so Mike, over to you to wrap things up.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, all of you. We've covered an enormous amount of ground tonight, and I know some of it had to be rattled through a bit quickly, and some of it there were some technical glitches, but if I may assume on behalf of all the attendees to thank all three of you very much. I know that there were some questions, in fact quite a few questions, which we didn't have time for. We are able, thanks to the wonders of Zoom, to pull off a list of the questions which were run through the Q&A button rather than the chat button. That was one of the reasons I was urging you to use Q&A. So Richard, Daniel, if I may, I'll run that list, and any unanswered ones we'll do our very best to answer the questioner directly, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that, Mike. I'm very happy to publish the answers for others to see as well. So whatever we can do to get them turned around. And sorry that we talked for too long to stop us getting through them all.
Well, it was a very interesting chat. So thank you very much. The chat is just as important as the questions. So anyway, thank you everybody who attended this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. It's the first time we've tried to do a regional focused webinar, and I'm quite chuffed that it was the Northwest that kicked this one off. I think we set a great standard. So thank you very much. I'm going to wrap things up now, and those who haven't had their dinner yet can go and have their dinner. So thank you again, and good night.